All right, welcome back to your daily read aloud. We are reading My Side of the Mountain, and we have so far read a few chapters. Yesterday, when we stopped reading, Sam was looking for somewhere on the old Gribbly farm to set up where he's going to live, and an idea just dawned on him. What was he looking at? Does anyone remember? What is he thinking about? He's staring at something. Cadence?
It was like this old grass-covered house.
Okay, so he found the foundation of his old grandfather's house, and that's where he stayed the first night. And then he found a large, majestic something, and he's just staring at it.
Tree?
A tree, a hemlock tree. And he says these trees are so big, maybe they're older than the mountain itself, which that might be an exaggeration, right? But he means they are old, and they're big, and they're tall. Remember, 6 feet in diameter, that would be way further from me to that corner. Okay, so 6 feet across. It's a large tree. All right. Today, we will find out what he's going to do with that tree and if he will be successful. And this chapter is called, This is About the Old, Old Tree. I knew enough about the Catskill Mountains to know that when the summer came, they were covered with people. Why do you think people would go to the mountains in the summer? Why would there be so many people there? I liked your answer, Quentin. Raise your hand. Quentin.
Because they were going to hike.
Yeah, it's hard to hike in the mountains in the winter. It's way hard. But in the summer, you can walk your trail. It's nice and no snow. So anyway, when summer came, they were covered with people. Although great-grandfather's farm was somewhat remote, still hikers and campers and hunters and fishermen were sure to wander across it. Therefore, I wanted a house that could not be seen. People would want to take me back where I belonged if they found me. I looked at that tree. Somehow I knew it was home, but I was not quite sure how it was home. The limbs were high and not right for a tree house. I could build a bark extension around it, but that would look silly. Slowly I circled the great trunk. Halfway around, the whole plan became perfectly obvious. To the west, between two of the flanges of the tree that spread out to be roots, was a cavity. So that's like a little hole, right? If you have a cavity in your tooth, there's a hole digging down into your tooth. Same thing in a tree. It's a little hole. The heart of the tree was rotting away. I scraped at it with my hands. Old, rotten, insect-ridden dust came tumbling out. I dug on and on, using my axe from time to time as my excitement grew. With much of the old rot out, I could crawl in the tree and sit cross-legged. Inside, I felt as cozy as a turtle in its shell. I chopped and chopped until I was hungry and exhausted. I was now in the good hardwood, and chopping it out was work. I was afraid December would come before I got a hole big enough to lie in, so I sat down to think. You know, those first days, I just never planned right. I had the beginnings of a home, but not a bite to eat. And I had worked so hard that I could hardly move forward to find that bite. Furthermore, it was discouraging to feed that body of mine. It was never satisfied, and gathering food for it took time and got it even hungrier. Trying to get a place to rest it took time and got it more tired. And I really felt I was going in circles and wondered how primitive man had ever had enough time and energy to stop hunting food and start thinking about fire and tools. I left the tree and went across the meadow looking for food. I plunged into the woods beyond, and there I discovered the gorge and the white cascade splashing down the black rocks into the pool below. I was hot and dirty. I scrambled down the rocks and slipped into the pool. It was so cold I yelled. But when I came out on the bank and put on my 2 pairs of trousers and 3 sweaters, which I thought was a better way to carry clothes than in a pack, I tingled and burned and felt coltish. I leaped up the bank, slipped, and my face went down in a patch of dogtooth violets. You would know them anywhere after a few looks at them at the botanical garden and in colored flower books. They are little yellow lilies on long, slender stems with oval leaves dappled with gray. But that's not all. They have wonderfully tasty bulbs. So remember, the bulbs are the underground part, right? Like an onion. I was filling my pockets before I got up from my fall. I'll have a salad type of lunch, I said, as I moved up the steep sides of the ravine. I discovered that as late as it was in the season, the spring beauties were still blooming in the cool pockets of the woods. They are all right raw. That is, if you are as hungry as I was. They taste a little like lima beans. And I've got to admit, I hate lima beans, so I would not be into this food. I ate these as I went on hunting food, feeling better and better, until I worked my way back to the meadow where the dandelions were blooming. Funny I hadn't noticed them earlier. Their greens are good, and so are their roots. A little strong and milky, but you get used to that. So I'm just curious, raise your hand if you've ever heard of anybody making a dish using dandelions. Okay? Some people cook with dandelions. You can use, not the flowers, those are, yuck, but you can use the stems and the roots to make stuff. So I have tried one bite of a dandelion casserole. I didn't love it, but I tried it, which is important, right? So if you ever get to try dandelions, give them a try. A crow. A crow flew into the aspen grove without saying a word. The little I know of crows from following them in Central Park, they always have something to say. But this bird was sneaking, obviously trying to be quiet. Birds are good food. Crow is certainly not the best, but I did not know that then, and I launched out to see where it was going. I had a vague plan to try to noose it. So that would be like you get a rope lasso and try to throw a loop over its neck. Do you think that'd be very easy?
No.
Nah, I don't think that would work. This is the kind of thing I wasted time on in those early days when time was so important. However, this venture turned out all right because I did not have to noose that bird. I stepped into the woods, looked around, could not see the crow, but noticed a big stick nest in a scrabbly pine. I started to climb the tree. Off flew the crow. What made me keep on climbing in face of such discouragement? I don't know, but I did. And that noon, I had crow eggs and wild salad for lunch. So, why was the crow sneaking around up to the tree? What did she have up there, Angie?
She was a mom, so she had eggs.
She had eggs. So he watched that crow, found where her nest was. When the bird left, he ate them. Which might sound sad, but when you are surviving in the wild, you have to do what it takes to survive, right? So now he is basically a predator on the mountain. All right. At lunch, I also solved the problem of carving out my tree. After a struggle, I made a fire. Then I sewed a big skunk cabbage leaf onto a cup with grass strands. I had read that you can boil water in a leaf, and ever since then, I had been very anxious to see if it were true. It seems impossible, but it works. So if you don't have a bucket and you need to heat water, you can get a big leaf and boil water in your leaf. I boiled the eggs in a leaf. The water keeps the leaf wet, and although the top dries up and burns down to the water level, that's as far as the burning goes. I was pleased to see it work. Then, here's what happened. Naturally, all this took a lot of time, and I hadn't gotten very far on my tree. So I was fretting, that means worrying, and stamping out the fire when I stopped with my foot in the air. The fire! Indians made dugout canoes with fire. They burned them out, an easier and much faster way of getting results. I would try fire in my tree. If I was very careful, perhaps it would work. I ran into the hemlock forest with a burning stick and got a fire going inside the tree. Thinking that I ought to have a bucket of water in case things got out of hand, I looked desperately around me. The water was far across the meadow and down the ravine. This would never do. I began to think the whole inspiration of a home in the tree was no good. I really did have to live near water for cooking and drinking and comfort. I looked sadly at the magnificent hemlock and was about to put the fire out and desert it when I said something to myself. It must have come out of some book. Hemlocks usually grow around mountain streams and springs. I swirled on my heel. Nothing but boulders and me. But the air was damp. Somewhere, I said, and darting around the rocks, peering and looking and sniffing and going down into pockets and dales. No water. I was coming back, circling wide, when I almost fell in it. 2 centennial boulders, dripping wet, decorated with flowers, ferns, moss, weeds, everything that loved water, guarded a bathtub-sized spring. You pretty thing, I said, flopping on my stomach, and pushed my face into it to drink. I opened my eyes. The water was like glass, and in it were little insects with oars. They rowed away from me. Beetles skittered like bullets on the surface, or carried a silver bubble of air with them to the bottom. Ha! Then I saw a crayfish. I jumped up, overturned rocks, and found many crayfish. So that's like a crawdad. They're little pincher animals. I gritted my teeth, thought about how much more it hurts to be hungry, and came down upon them. I did get pinched, but I had my dinner. And that was the first time I'd planned ahead. Any planning that I did in those early days was such a surprise to me and so successful that I was delighted with even a small plan. I wrapped the crayfish in leaves, stuffed them in my pockets, and went back to burning the tree. Bucket of water, I thought. Bucket of water. Where was I going to get a bucket? How did I think, even if I found water, I could get it back to the tree? That's how citified I was in those days, right? If you're citified, all you know is stuff from the city. And do you always have buckets around? I mean, if you needed a bucket, could we find something to be a bucket?
Yeah.
Yeah. But out in the woods, there's really nothing that you can carry water in. I had never lived without a bucket before. Scrub buckets, water buckets. And so when a water problem came up, I just thought I could run to the kitchen and get a bucket. Well, dirt is as good as water, I said as I ran back to my tree. I can smother the fire with dirt. Did you guys know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that can take away the oxygen to the fire will also put it out. So you can dump, like if you ever have a bacon fire on your stove, you're actually not supposed to use water, you're supposed to use flour. So when you dump a bunch of dry stuff over your fire, it snuffs it out because your fire needs oxygen. And when you cover it all up, it can't get to the air. Mm-hmm. So he's going to use dirt to put the fire out, which is pretty smart. I can smother the fire with dirt. Days passed working, burning, cutting, gathering food, and each day I cut another notch on an aspen pole that I had stuck in the ground for a calendar. All right, we'll read a little bit more of the next chapter, which is called, I Meet One of My Own Kind and Have a Terrible Time Getting Away. 5 notches into June, my house was done. I could stand in it, lie down in it, and there was room left over for a stump to sit on. On warm evenings, I would lie on my stomach and look out the door, listen to the frogs and nighthawks, and hope it would storm so I could crawl into my tree and be dry. Wouldn't that be a great feeling? Everything you'd worked so hard for, as storms come and you can just crawl in there and watch. That'd be great. Yeah. I'd gotten soaked during a couple of May downpours, and now that my tree was done, I wanted the chance to sit in my hemlock and watch a cloudburst wet everything but me. This opportunity didn't come for a long time. It was dry. One morning, I was at the edge of the meadow. I had cut down a small ash tree and was chopping it into lengths of about 18 inches each. This was the beginning of my bed that I was planning to work on after supper every night. With the golden summer upon me, food was much easier to get, and I actually had several hours of free time after supper in which to do other things. I had been eating frog legs, turtles, and best of all, an occasional rabbit. My snares and traps were all set now. Furthermore, I had a good supply of cattail roots I had dug in the marsh. So I have not eaten turtle. I'll be honest about that. Abby and Liam, you don't know much about this, but I grew up eating all of my food basically from my woods. So my family all hunted. They hunted and trapped and fished. So my meat growing up was deer meat, rabbit, ducks, geese, squirrels, turtle doves, geese. Very different, right? They also did do frog legs, and I said I draw the line there. I refuse to eat them. I have never eaten a frog leg, and my dad didn't make me. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I have heard they're good, but I just couldn't handle the frog situation in my head. Chloe?
I've tried frog legs before.
Did you like them? Mm-hmm. I've heard they're actually really good. So next time maybe I'll try to be brave.
Wait, so when you were little, you didn't go to any restaurant?
We did go to restaurants sometimes, but we didn't have a lot of money, and we had a big woods, and my family liked to hunt. So sometimes we'd have chicken, like normal meat from the store, but mostly we ate deer meat, which is called venison. So I can relate to Sam, but some of this stuff, like eating a turtle, I don't know about eating a turtle.
My brother ate deer meat before.
Mm-hmm. Deer meat's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you,
Is.
like we ate like chili, you know when you have chili soup? Usually you put ground beef in there, but if you put ground venison in there, it tastes about the same, and it's a little healthier. So, that's just a little bit about me with this food, but it might sound really strange to you if you've never eaten it, but really, this is how people have been eating until we had big grocery stores, right?
How
Liam?
do you get it?
They go hunting.
Like with a gun?
Mhm.
Or like,
So my family, they'd hunt with guns or bows and arrows sometimes. They also would trap animals with traps. Fishing, use a fishing pole. And for frogs is the weird one. You use something called a frog gig. And it looks like a long spear with like a trident on the end, 3 spikes. So you go at night, and when you see them along the shore, you kind of throw it at them like a spear. So, lots of different ways to hunt for animals. So if you're ever curious, we can talk about this more later. But that is why Sam is, make sure we're listening. That's why he's eating these animals. He needs protein, right? And it's hard to find protein if you don't find animal meat. Chloe?
How did you get the gun out of the animal?
How did I what?
How did you get the bullet out of the animal?
So when someone cleans an animal, which I never wanted to help with that, I would watch a little bit just because I was curious. When you take out the parts of the animal you can eat, because a lot of the animal you don't eat, right? Your organs and bones. So you take the parts out you want to eat, and then when you cut it up into pieces to cook, you have to you can find the bullet, you just pick it out. So usually they come out. Sometimes when you eat wild game, you might find a bullet in your cooked food, and then you just take it and set it on your plate. That has happened to me, so interesting stuff. Probably a little different than what you all are used to when you eat dinner, but all right, so cattails. He dug up a bunch of cattails, which also I've never eaten, but I did grow up in a marsh, so I saw them, but we didn't eat cattails.
what are cattails?
1 second.
What do you do with the bullet?
Just get rid of it.
You throw it away.
Yeah.
Just had to
Okay, Angie, a cattail grows around water, and they're long brown stalks, and they've got those brown pieces at the top that have the fluff that come out. They're really tall. So that's a cattail.
I've tried growing them once in my backyard.
Yeah?
It rained a lot that year, and when I went outside, there was like a little tiny stem, but it died after a few days.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll show us some pictures of cattails sometimes. I've got a lot of pictures from my parents' house. I could show those later. All right, so he's got his cattail roots. If you ever eat cattails, be sure to cook them well. Otherwise, the fibers are tough, and they take more chewing to get the starchy food from them than they are worth. However, they taste just like potatoes after you've been eating them for a couple of weeks, and to my way of thinking, are extremely good. Well, anyway, that summer morning when I was gathering material for a bed, I was singing and chopping and playing a game with a raccoon I'd come to know. He had just crawled in a hollow tree and had gone to bed for the day when I came to the meadow. From time to time, I would tap on his tree with my axe. He would hang his sleepy head out, snarl at me, close his eyes, and slide out of sight. The third time I did this, I knew something was happening in the forest. Instead of closing his eyes, he pricked up his ears, and his face became drawn and tense. His eyes were focused on something down the mountain. I stood up and looked. I could see nothing. I squatted down and went back to work. The raccoon dove out of sight. "Now what's got you all excited?" I said, and tried once more to see what he had seen. I finished the post for the bed and was looking around for a bigger ash to fell and make slats for the springs when I nearly jumped out of my shoes. "Now what are you doing up here all alone?" It was a human voice. I swung around and stood face to face with a little old lady in a pale blue sunbonnet and a loose brown dress. "Oh gosh," I said, "don't scare me like that. Say one word at a time until I get used to a human voice." I must have looked frightened because she chuckled, smoothed down the front of her dress, and whispered, "Are you lost?" "Oh no, ma'am," I stuttered. "Well, then a little fellow like you should not be all alone way up here on this haunted mountain." "Haunted?" I said. "Oh, yes, indeed. There's an old story. Says there are little men up there who play ninepins right down in that gorge in the twilight." She peered at me. "Are you one of them?" "Oh, no, I said. "I've read that story. It's just make-believe." I laughed, and she puckered her forehead. "Well, come on," she said. "Make some use of yourself and help me fill this basket with strawberries." I hesitated. She meant my strawberry supply. Now, get on with you. A boy your age should be doing something worthwhile instead of just playing numbly peg with sticks. Come on, young man. She jogged me out into the meadow. We worked quite a while before she said any more. Frankly, I was wondering how to save my precious, precious strawberries. And may I say I picked slowly. Every time I dropped one in her basket, I thought how good it would taste. Where do you live? I jumped. It is terribly odd to hear a voice after weeks of listening only to birds and raccoons and what is more, to hear the voice ask a question like that. I live here, I said. You mean Delhi. Fine. You can walk me home. Nothing I added did any good. She would not be shaken from her belief that I lived in Delhi, so I let it go. We must have reaped every last strawberry before she stood up, put her arm in mine, and escorted me down the mountain. I certainly was not escorting her. Her wiry little arms were like crayfish pincers. I couldn't have gotten away if I tried. So I walked and listened. She told me all the local and world news, and it was rather pleasant to hear about the National League, an atom bomb test, and a Mr. Riley's three-legged dog that chased her chickens. In the middle of all this chatter, she said, "That's the best strawberry patch in the entire Catskill Range. I come up here every spring. For 40 years. I've come to that very meadow for my strawberries." It gets harder every year, but there's no jam can beat the jam from that mountain. I know. I've been around here all my life. Then she went right into the New York Yanks without putting in a period. As I helped her across the stream on big boulders, I heard a cry in the sky. I looked up. Swinging down the valley on long pointed wings was a large bird. I was struck by the ease and swiftness of its flight. "Duckhawk," she said, "nest around here every year. My man used to shoot 'em. He said they killed chickens, but I don't believe it. The only thing that kills chickens is Mr. Riley's three-legged dog." She tipped and teetered as she crossed the rocks, but kept right on talking and stepping, as if she knew that no matter what, she would get across. We finally reached the road. I wasn't listening to her very much. I was thinking about that duckhawk. This bird, I was sure, was a peregrine falcon, the king's hunting bird. I will get one. I will train it to hunt for me, I said to myself. Finally, I got the little old lady to her brown house at the edge of town. She turned fiercely upon me. I started back. "Now, where are you going, young man?" I stopped. Now, I thought, she is going to march me into town. Into town? Well, that's where I'll go then, I said to myself. And I turned on my heel, smiled at her, and replied, "To the library." All right, that is it. So, any ideas? What do you think he might want to look up at the library? So he's already been there once. What might he need to know now? Eric?
He might want to go there and try to find like a different, or ask that lady and check out some, like eating books.
Okay, so maybe he wants some of those edible plant books that she talked about. Yeah.
So he can have more, and that old lady, he takes his strawberries, so he has to find something else.
Yeah, isn't that the worst to read? Because strawberries actually taste so good. So you would just know, like, she's taking all of my dessert. Madeline.
He's gonna look for a book about, like, that bird that he saw.
Oh, raise your hand if you agree with Madeline. All right, so he saw that duckhawk, which is a peregrine falcon, and we are going to learn more about them. It's one of the coolest birds on the planet. It's one of the fastest birds on the planet.
You have it on that poster.
I'll have to check in a minute. But a lot of the story has to do with this bird. We already know that he does tame a bird because at the beginning he has Frightful. So, next couple chapters we will get to meet my favorite character in the story. Hayden?
Maybe he wants to, like, look at a book that, like, is, like, how to
train a falcon?
train a falcon to, like, hunt for you and stuff.
Yeah. All right, you all at home, I will see you later.